If you make it out to any farm show, you're going to see that there are a ton of different companies that build machinery for farmers.
From the livestock space all the way into the specialty crop lettuce space, there's just a huge amount of machinery that is being built that's not falling under the purview of the big three OEMs. And so that was kind of our thesis with Mach, is that the mid-size OEMs, some of them can be pretty significantly sized, but they don't have a great way to get access to this technology today.
With everything moving in this direction of smart, tech-enabled, and in some cases autonomous tractors and implements, how can the small and mid-sized manufacturer incorporate this latest technology into their equipment? The answer to this question is what led Colin, Hurd, and others to combine efforts to form Mach.
We're this truly independent partner for short line OEMs or mid-size OEMs, and not only can we take on some of the engineering burden in terms of how do you integrate this technology onto their equipment, but we also then can supply them a full solution that they can then take, integrate onto their machine and take it to market.
A peek behind the scenes into the smartification of farm equipment on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and every week, you and I get to hear from the farmers, founders, innovators, and investors, the people shaping the future of the ag industry. And we have a really cool episode here today, a ton of wisdom in today's episode. But first, I want to take just a moment to recognize our quarterly presenting sponsor this quarter, which is Case IH. As most of you know, I'm fascinated by the way technology and innovation are shaping the future of agriculture. Hence, that's why I do this podcast. And it's also why I'm really excited to partner with Case IH this quarter. Case IH designs, engineers, and produces cutting-edge farm equipment based on a comprehensive understanding of farmers' needs, wants, and challenges, integrating these insights into their development and manufacturing. For example, take their model year 25 Magnum tractor. The new Magnum is purposefully designed to answer farmers' needs in every design and engineering choice. Improved horsepower for pulling heavier loads faster, bundled, integrated, and ready-to-go precision tech for greater accuracy in the field, and a transmission farmers can tweak for improved control and performance in different tasks. That kind of design thinking is exactly where the future of ag is headed, and that's why you'll be hearing me talk to a few folks at Case IH at different points throughout this quarter about what they do and how they're working to push ag forward. Thanks again to Case IH for their leadership in ag innovation and for supporting the Future of Agriculture podcast. All right, today's episode features Colin Hurd, who is the CEO of Mach. Colin first appeared on this show back on episode 180. That was in November of 2019. And at that time, he had just sold his previous company, Smart Ag, to Raven Industries. Colin continued working for Raven Industries, which became part of CNH Industrial until 2022, when he left and eventually helped to bring together a partnership merger, which formed Mach. Mach works with original equipment manufacturers, otherwise known as OEMs. These are all the companies that manufacture equipment, in our context, farm equipment. Mach helps these OEMs that want to incorporate autonomy and or automation into their products. This is another part of the insights that I took away from my experience at FIRA USA this past fall, which is that there's this whole emerging industry of companies that exist to service the robotics and automation companies so that they can bring their solutions to farmers. And Mach is one of those companies. They don't sell to farmers, they sell to all of these OEMs. How many of these OEMs are out there? Well, I think probably more than you realize or more than you might think. Also, I'm just delighted to have Colin back on the show because he offers just a really rich perspective as a technologist with a really deep understanding of agriculture and, of course, an accomplished entrepreneur in this industry. Colin's going to discuss the current landscape of ag equipment manufacturers, some of the tailwinds and some of the headwinds in bringing more autonomous solutions to the farm, a cool case study of how Mach is working with another former podcast guest, Gus Automation, whether or not he thinks Mach can actually be a big company by servicing these medium-sized OEMs, and also Colin's predictions for what the future might hold for this part of the industry. I'll drop you into this conversation where Colin is sharing some additional background about his passion for agricultural machinery.
My exposure to agriculture really kind of first came through the machinery side. And I was, even as a young kid, just drawn to the machine side of agriculture. And my parents didn't farm. And so it was never like an obligation for me to go work in the field. So I was always trying to find ways to do that. And I continued to do that all through college and obviously throughout the rest of my career. And so the machinery side of agriculture has just been always very appealing to me. And then the other aspect of it, which this is just maybe the entrepreneurial nature of how I grew up and how I think about the world. And I'm sure a lot of people share this, but when you see a solution that works in one area and you ask the question, like, why hasn't this been done yet over here? Sometimes the answer to that question is simply that nobody's taking it seriously, right? And so when I started Smart Ag back in 2016 timeframe, that was kind of it, right? No one at that point had truly taken autonomous agriculture seriously, or so it appeared, right? Shortly after I started Smart Ag, then all of a sudden, CNH debuts this cabless, cool looking autonomous prototype tractor. And I was like, oh, well, crap, I'm way too late to the party. But turns out I was actually still very early at that point. And so I've had the experience now of being really early at Smart Ag and Raven, and now we're actually gradually making progress as an industry. I know you were out at the FIRA show, and it's robotics in farming. Autonomous farming is now it's not a wild thing to talk to somebody about, but it still hasn't happened, right? It's not like you can just go to a dealership and buy an autonomous tractor and then just put it in your field and get the job done, right? So there's still a ton to be done there. And I think I always kind of felt like the problem that we're solving, this labor challenge, this optimization of yield, growing more with less, is not going to be solved just by genetics. It's not going to be solved just by inputs. It's going to be solved with technology primarily, actually, I believe. And so there's just a ton of low-hanging fruit, I feel like, in this space. And there's a really significant opportunity, even outside of agriculture. We see it today. So I guess it's the frontier, right? Just like back when the West was settled, that's what drew people there. It was this open frontier, and there's so much to do and so much to learn, and that's exciting.
Yeah, and to me, especially just coming from FIRA, it seems like it's not this frontier that one person or one company or one entity is going to win and dominate. It seems like it's going to be a lot of different solutions from a lot of different companies. And that's probably part of the thesis behind Mach, would be my guess, because your customer is not the farmer. You're not trying to win the autonomy game. Your customer is the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, that wants to make these products but needs some technical help. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Because for us, there has been this kind of widening gap, I would call it, and it's because of consolidation. And so to your point of a lot of people solving this problem, well, yes and no, right? Because a lot of the small companies in the early days, like what Smart Ag was, are now all the way acquired into CNH. And so there's a lot of individual smaller players that are working on some of these challenges in very unique ways, which is exciting. But if you think about the legacy equipment manufacturers, the guys who are not John Deere, AGCO, or CNH, there's a lot of machinery that's getting made by those companies. And it's also kind of diversified based off crop types and regions of farming. And, from the livestock space all the way into the specialty crop lettuce space, there's just a huge amount of machinery that is being built that's not falling under the purview of the big three OEMs. And so that was kind of our thesis with Mach, is that the mid-size OEMs, some of them can be pretty significantly sized, but they don't have a great way to get access to this technology today. And so they know that there's a need, their customers are asking for it, but they don't have a team of AI and machine vision engineers on staff, right? These are companies that are, potentially in the middle of the heartland, and rural areas with limited manufacturing footprints, and they have to focus on day in and day out is getting the right people in the factory to actually help build the equipment that they are making. And so that's where we really, I think, provide a lot of unique value, is that we're this truly independent partner for short line OEMs or mid-size OEMs. And not only can we take on some of the engineering burden in terms of how do you integrate this technology onto their equipment, but we also then can supply them a full solution that they can then integrate onto their machine and take it to market, right?
Yeah, I think from the outside, what somebody not exposed to the industry might say is like, well, how many autonomous tractors can there be? And the truth is, and you see this especially when you go to a place like FIRA, like, we're not just talking about tractors here. We're talking about, implements. We're talking about smaller machines that do really specific tasks, and it can still make sense economically because it's not as expensive as, a combine or something like that. And it does seem like there's quite a landscape of OEMs that are kind of attacking this space.
I mean, it's a new frontier, like I said before, and with that comes new opportunity. And I think one of the biggest opportunities is to disrupt the way things have always been done. And this technology, if applied correctly, can be very disruptive. And I think we've even started to see certain machinery being built around the fact that autonomy is a possibility. So, you're seeing machines built today that could have never been marketed 10 years ago because they don't have cabs. They don't have a lot of the standard things that are required for an operator to interface with the machine. They have like the equivalent of a heavy duty Xbox controller. They have the motors and whatever the tool system is that it needs to implement on the field. So some of those are going to fall by the wayside. Not everybody's going to hit a home run as they build a new machine type or try to innovate around the autonomy frontier. But I think a lot of them are going to have very good traction and become disruptive. I mean, one of our first customers in the ag space is a company called Gus. And I think they're just an excellent example of what can happen and how that disruption can drive change, right? So if we can go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, I'd like to talk about like just what I've observed over the last probably 5 years with some exposure to the orchard industry in California. I don't know how familiar you are with that industry. It's, I hardly knew anything about it when I kind of first got exposed, but
yeah, Gary from Gus was on the show. I checked about 100 episodes after yours, so he's on 284.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. And I'm from California, so I have some personal exposure to that, but please talk because a lot of the audience is not.
Sure. Yeah. So I just think it's really interesting, like what Gary and Dave from Gus were able to do, right? Is, they were solving a problem first for themselves, which is always a great way to innovate. They experienced this labor challenges and inefficiencies with orchard spraying. And so then they were able to commercialize a solution leveraging the tech stack that Mach has and take it to the market relatively quick, right? I mean, I think we prototyped the first vehicle with them in 2016, and by 2018, they had a system that they were starting to sell it in a limited fashion. And then, since then, there's 200 some vehicles that have been deployed with this technology on it, which is really impressive. It's part of what led me to form Mach, but it's also part of the inspiration, I think, for why the orchard space, which historically has lagged precision ag massively, right? They don't have a yield monitor, right? Like there's so much there that is just kind of bare bones iron with no real technology integrated on it. And then now you've introduced full-blown autonomy. So you leapfrog the typical progression of precision ag, which is basic automation, gradually increasing the level of control that the machine has over itself. So now you just leapfrog that with Gus. And now you've seen all these other companies pursuing that as well and saying, look, we don't need to figure out yield monitoring. We just need to make it autonomous and we'll do that later, right? It's just really interesting to see that happen and, the impact that technology can have just on that one industry as a whole. I just think it's a really interesting case study to look at, not necessarily how Gus did it specifically, but what were all the downstream disruptions that caused in that space. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think Gus is a great example. A lot of people know it. If you've ever seen a Gus machine, you have a clear picture in your mind of what it looks like because it stands out, right? It looks kind of like an autonomous version of the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz a little bit, tipped on his side, right? Like it stands out. And I think that's a great example too, because like you said, I can picture a lot of situations where somebody's like, this is a problem in my industry, in my corner of agriculture that needs to be solved, and I want to be the one to solve it. I just don't have any of the technical capabilities to do this. Bring in Mach. I'm going to ask a really crude question, and I know you're going to take it in a very insightful direction. The crude question is, with that model in mind, like this, Mach supporting companies like Gus, can Mach be a big company, or does that even matter to you?
It's a great question, Tim. I would say when we formed Mach, and maybe I'll just give you the backstory on Mach and how we came to be. So while I was at Raven, obviously, I was aware of Gus. Saw what they were doing, and was very interested to learn more, especially about the technology, because here I am at one of the largest ag companies in the world with seemingly infinite budget to do whatever we needed to do. At that point, now it's a different story, but there's this little company in California that's sold more autonomous systems than anybody else in agriculture at that point, and it's commercial, right? So like, what are these guys doing differently? How did they crack this nut that we can't seem to figure out here with all the resources and capabilities of a company like Raven and CNH? Part of it is like they don't have as much process in place, right? So they just move faster. And the startup always has that competitive differentiation and advantage over any big company. So as I dug deeper into it, I realized that they were leveraging this technology, which was coming from a company in Maryland. The company in Maryland was called LSA Autonomy. It was owned by three guys. They had spent 10 years of their career after leaving General Dynamics robotic systems. And they were automating a huge variety of different vehicles in the off-road space. So for the Army, for the Navy, Marine Corps, different applications, different types of vehicles. And they just had developed a really stable solution that Gus was able to leverage. And so I was like, what I learned, I guess, with Smart Ag was that it's not just about your unique approach to how you solve the issues related to autonomy. So much of it is about having achieved some level of real scale, right? And so there's so much learning and hardening and edge cases that these guys had already encountered that if I was to start from scratch, I would have to do all over again. And so they were at a point with the company where they kind of felt like, hey, to grow it, we need help. We want it to grow. We see the value in the technology that we've created. They were primarily just on a contract basis for a lot of the DoD projects. And so it made a lot of sense to start a discussion with them. In the meantime, I ran into a former mentor of mine, a guy named Brett Schildroth, who had helped me some at Smart Ag. And he had also started his own company focused on autonomy. He had really invested in the hardware side of it and the machine vision piece, which was sort of lacking when we looked at LSA. And so, things just came together in a way where both these companies said, look, we see the big picture. We like the approach. We want to take this technology. We want to get it commercialized. And we think there's a good opportunity to do that. And so that's how Mach was formed. And not that much detail was needed, but that's how we kind of got started. And so if you would have asked me at that point, could we be a big company? So getting back to your question, I would have said, we can be a medium-sized company. I think we can have, a strong customer base. We can grow relatively consistently, but this isn't like a venture capital huge opportunity where, oh my gosh, one day this thing is a public company, right? Fast forward almost 2 years, 1 year and 11 months. The opportunity now is blowing me away. What we see from a pipeline standpoint, what we see in agriculture, what we're seeing outside of agriculture is significant. There's more companies out there building more different types of machinery than I ever could have imagined. And so many of them, whether they have some of this technology on their own or they have gaps in what they can do, they need a independent partner that understands their business, understands the use case, and has the foundational technology to enable whatever the solution is. And so, yeah, I do think it actually could be very big. The opportunity for us is not in helping engineer our system into a vehicle. We lose money doing that. But the value of it is that as these machines go to market, then we can supply the system over time. And that's where we make incremental margin on each machine that we sell and we support them with. And so that's where I think a lot of the upside opportunity comes from. Now, we have to be patient with that because it doesn't happen overnight. Somebody doesn't build a brand new autonomous machine overnight and take it to market. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives you a little more.
No, it's a great answer, and I appreciate it. I knew I had to ask the question to get you there, but that is what I was hoping to hear. Is it sort of? I mean, in some ways, is it kind of like an Intel like business model where I'm buying a computer that's powered by Intel, but I'm not going to go shop the Intel store?
That's a good way to look at it. I mean, there's other companies out there too. I mean, the OEM supply space is very well established, right? I mean, sometimes I have to remind our customers even that, not everything has to be built in-house. Most companies don't build their own engine. They source it from somebody else. And then almost no company builds their own tires or track systems, right? They source those things. They source a lot of electronic components already. They source a lot of hydraulic, control valves. So it's very much that. I think the main difference is like the turning point here is that when you have a vehicle that is autonomous, let's say like Gus with no cab on it, that machine is now entirely technology dependent, meaning that if the underlying system, whether that is a piece of hardware or a line of software, is failing, then all of a sudden you have a, $500,000 machine in many cases that is rendered useless because of a small little thing. So the dependency on that technology goes way up when you take the operator side out of it.
It reminds me, and I think I've shared this already on the podcast before, but in case I haven't, I was reading a book that was talking about, the type of business you want to be in. And it was talking about a seasoning company that sold all the seasoning for fried chicken for these, restaurants all over the country, and how the seasoning makes all the difference because that's where all the flavor is coming from. But as far as like the makeup of the fried chicken itself is a very small part of the overall cost of that fried chicken, right? And so it's like the company's working to switch if you doubled your price because it's still a small percentage, but it's that important. Like it is the difference between the customer liking it and disliking it. I don't know. It seems like there's some similarities there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think we can give our customers over 12 years of R&D and experience. In some cases, we can do that in less than a month, right? So we had a great collaboration just recently for the Equip Expo where a company by the name of McConnell, based out of the UK, they make a variety of mowing equipment. They said, hey, can we do this with you? And we said, great. Yeah, absolutely. But we want to show it at the Equip Expo. And so Equip Expo is the equivalent of like Farm Progress Show. It's like this just huge bunch of landscaping contractors and machinery providers for that space there. And so they air freighted us a mower. We integrated our technology on it. And in 2 weeks, it was autonomous. And a week later, it was in Louisville being showed to thousands of people. And so it's really cool to be at a point now where we can do things like that. That's probably one of the more simple use cases because we're just covering an area, right? And there's a lot of times we get into projects that are much more detailed and complicated and, you have to operate without GPS for a period of time and things like that. And so there's always a lot of variability based off the use case. But the fact that we can now provide this solution in a very efficient and very quick manner and get somebody from zero autonomy to, hey, we're selling an autonomous machine that, in all honesty, is probably going to be performing better than any other competitive machine that's out there that didn't come through Mach, right? It's pretty cool. It's exciting.
Yeah. And I think when we were talking 5 years ago, if we were going to talk about like the constraints holding back autonomy in agriculture, we definitely would have wanted to talk about, GPUs and processing power and connectivity and, probably advancements in the actual software side of things, but all those things have come a long way in recent years. As you look forward, what do you see as the constraints from autonomy, expanding onto the farm?
Well, you're right. We have come a long ways on, especially the compute side. Compute's really just not a factor, like in a lot of the applications we're in today, because it's affordable and you can integrate it on the edge. I would say the sensing side is still very much unsolved for scalable agriculture. So what we're focused on from an R&D standpoint is, how do you understand if the job is being done safely and to the quality that it needs to be done, assuming that nobody's in the cab of the tractor. And so a lot of times, well, I would say about 50% of our customers are not building a self-propelled vehicle. They're actually building an implement. And so our focus with those applications is, how does the implement have enough intelligence to know, hey, I'm doing the job right? And so there's a whole lot of sensing that has to happen there. And the best analogy is like whatever you're supposed to be doing when you're in the cab of the tractor, like looking behind you, not looking at Netflix, and paying attention to, is something plugged up? Is a bearing going out? Is the depth right? Are all my row pressure settings right? Whatever job it is you're doing, you're in the cab, not really to drive the tractor as much today anymore, but is to monitor the status of the implement and the job that you're doing. And so if you remove somebody from the cab, then all of a sudden you have all this sensing capability that's required on the implement itself. And so part of our R&D is very, very focused on that right now. We have a sensor that we're coming out with the end of next year, which we're super excited about. I think it will make a huge difference. It might even be a requirement for some of these larger OEMs that I mentioned too, that we don't really focus on, but just to enable some of the robustness that's required in a tech solution on an implement, I think this can be a really capable sensor for that. So I'm excited about that aspect of what's still left to be solved. We have an approach at Mach that if we can find an off-the-shelf solution for something, we don't build it on our own, primarily hardware. And so we couldn't, several years ago, find a good off-the-shelf solution for a camera solution with stereo camera and being able to do machine vision on the edge. So we built that. We really did not have a great solution for managing connectivity from a machine-to-machine standpoint, machine to operator and machine to cloud. And so we built that. We also didn't have a great way to do the sensing. And so now we're building that solution and super excited about it.
And at what stage, I'm sure this varies, because I know you said you're working on a lot of implements. At what stage is someone coming to you? Do they have an existing product that they're looking to make autonomous? Do they see an opportunity and they want to start from scratch, or does it just really run the gamut?
I would say most people are coming to us, they're R&D teams, right? So the autonomous or automated machinery market is pretty nascent still. There's not a huge established market there, right? So we're not really disrupting a competitor. We're not necessarily taking the place of an existing technology. And so I would say the majority of our projects, we're joining their R&D group, where they're saying, hey, we want to have this solution in the next 3 years. We're building this new machine kind of around the technology in some cases, to enable it. And we're working with that team to prove it out. The downside with that is it's a long sales cycle, because we're tied to their mechanical engineering schedule in many cases. And so while we can often integrate and prove out the software hardware stack really quick, a lot of times they're still evaluating, like, do we have the right motors on this thing? Do we have the right pumps? Is it going to hit all the wear metrics and reliability specifications that we have for it? So there's a few cases where we drop into something that's sort of pre-existing and improve it a little bit, but I'd say the majority is kind of on the R&D side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to talk a little bit before I know I need to let you go, not too long, but a little bit about what happens next. One thing that struck me, in my experiences and conversations at FIRA was exactly what you were saying with Gus earlier. Like, here's this company that they just understand the problem really well and they're finding the solution. And that's sort of where Mach comes in to sort of help them. What other bottlenecks are existing out there? And I guess we've talked about that a little bit, but I'd like to know how you see Mach contributing to expanding the level of autonomy out there. What comes next for you guys?
I think it's on two major fronts. I mean, I see a big effort ongoing is on adding the intelligence to the implement, really helping companies have smart implements. So in my opinion, the major OEMs building tractors, they're all going to have an autonomous tractor to some degree in the future. But those autonomous tractors are pretty pointless if they can't do a job. And to do a job normally means you need to hook up to a certain implement or tool. The reality is that farmers, I think to a large degree, appreciate the ability to hook up a multicolored fleet or be able to have a multicolored fleet. And so I do think that there's some things that as Mach we can do to make that interface between a autonomous tractor and a smart implement more reliable. And we've had a number of conversations with even some of our competitors in this space about how do we seamlessly connect implements and tractors in the future to enable that capability to exist between both. So I think there's things there that need to be worked on on an industry level, which we definitely are focused on. I'm part of the technology council for the Farm Equipment Manufacturers Association, and that's a big topic that we focus on there is how do we ensure that not only can short line manufacturers maintain proprietary IP around their technology that they're integrating, but also compatibility with the brands of tractors that their customers are using. I'd say, the other thing I hear surprisingly from a lot of the OEMs we talk to is that, yeah, we really want to do autonomy, but we don't have any customers that actually are asking for this. And I'm like, well, have you asked any of your customers? And, surprisingly, a lot of times the answer is, well, not really, but we don't even know what to ask them. We don't even want to plant a seed until we have some assurance that there's a solution there. And, so I'd say if you're an end user of machinery or you're a farmer, be vocal about what you want from your OEMs, because we do work with a wide number of OEMs in a number of different parts of agriculture, and they're always looking for customers to help pull forward the solution and be very vocal about what they need a solution to do for them and how it should work and, what the requirements are. And that helps us help them. So I think that's definitely a thing where, I would ask anyone listening to this as you're thinking about different ways to potentially leverage this technology, which is proven, it does exist, it can make a difference, it can save you money, it can keep you safer. How would you apply it? What would you do on your own farm? What would you do in your own operations? And then, who are the OEMs that you leverage today? What companies' equipment do you use? What do you need from those companies? And, if it's all John Deere, well, talk to John Deere. Mach's probably not going to be able to influence that much, but especially if it's specialty type equipment where it's smaller OEMs, that's where I think we can provide value.
Absolutely. Well, while I got you here, I do want to take just a few minutes to talk about exits, specifically, getting these ag tech entrepreneurs. A good exit usually requires, if they're not going to IPO, usually requires an acquisition. And it does seem like the big OEMs that tend to acquire companies in the space, it's hit or miss on whether it actually advances autonomy in agriculture. And I know that's core to your mission. So how do you think about that? On one hand, let's get these entrepreneurs a successful exit and investors. And then on the other hand, you've got we really want to see autonomy advance. And sometimes it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. How do you think about that?
It's a tricky question because, as you know, I'm involved with the Ag Startup Engine as well. And so we do a lot of investments, not just in ag tech, but in other, animal health stuff as well. And generally speaking, the ag space doesn't have a great track record in terms of providing great exits to startups, whether that's, like you mentioned, the continuation of the R&D stalls out or doesn't advance at the pace it was, or the capital is really not there to justify the investment that's gone into the company in the first place. And so I think that market is still developing, but I do think, with Mach's case, and maybe other companies in this space, is not being just solely focused on selling to an OEM, right? That's a piece of the market. They're going to continue to buy technologies and companies that impact their portfolio and they see value in. But there is a whole lot of other businesses out there supplying agriculture. And I think looking beyond just the traditional exit opportunities might provide some interesting value. And that's kind of how I think we're positioned as a company. At some point, we do have investors. And so at some point, we'll need to provide a return to those investors. And there's multiple avenues for that, I think. But one of the areas that we're always aware of is, the companies that are already supplying our customers and helping them expand their portfolio, maybe through a partnership at some point in the future. But the best defense, in my opinion, to the exit challenge is to create profit. And so as we invest in different ag tech companies and different spaces through Ag Startup Engine, that's a huge focus of ours is, can this company actually get to profitability, right? Once you can get a startup to profitability, then an exit doesn't become a must-have, it becomes a nice-to-have. And they can continue on potentially for a long period of time, even while providing returns back to their investors and be stable, right? And we haven't seen a lot of that either. And so that's another area that I think we need to see, because until startups can start to prove out the economic viability of their business through a P&L, not just from a hypothetical, it's going to put undue pressure on the OEMs that potentially would acquire them, in my opinion.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. I promise I'm going to let you go, but I did see a video of a Mach-powered autonomous mower. Does it exist commercially, or is this just, I know it was a prototype, but what's the deal with that?
So there's a couple out there, actually. So there's one that we did on our own. We just said, hey, we need a vehicle to test out technology on. And so we bought a Ventrac, which is it's like a 30 horsepower garden articulated tractor. Really cool platform. And we converted that to be by-wire controlled, and we put our autonomy stack on it. In the process of doing that, we also found a customer that wants to take that solution to commercial mowing groups and also the solar space. So there's a company called Greenline Autonomy. We actually co-exhibited at the Equip Expo last month. So yes, the short answer is that solution is going to be available next year on the market. So, if you really hate mowing your grass, or let's say you have a bunch of hog sites you want to maintain or whatever, there's now a solution for that. And I think it will work really well. I mean, our CTO sits out on his porch every Sunday morning, drinks his coffee and gets his grass mowed and just watches it.
I love it. I mean, you think about golf courses or any sort of like large park that has to mow, basically every day. I would sure think that would be a no-brainer.
Yeah, or DOTs or municipalities. I mean, there's so much grass, surprisingly, that has to just get mowed all the time. And even like airports have a certain requirement in terms of the grass height. And so there's a whole lot of mowing that gets done. And in my opinion, it's a horrible use of human productivity and creativity. And so if there's a way that we can put a dent in that and find ways for people to be more efficient there, that's really cool.
It's going to cut down on podcast listenership, though. I get a lot of people who say, yeah, listen while I mow. Yes. I need to watch for like home focused autonomous mowers. I know there are some that exist, but maybe I need to start a lawn care business here and just rent out autonomous mowers for the season.
Yeah. Well, I know a guy who got one of the little, not like the Roomba version. It actually has it does lines and stuff. And I think it was like, a couple grand off Amazon. You can buy it and then hook it up to your home Wi-Fi and it just mows your lawn. And so he was like, yeah, well, my neighbors saw it going and they asked if while they're out of town, I'd mow their lawn. And, he's like, so I just end up taking it, down the sidewalk, drop it in their lawn, and I leave and come back and pick it up when I'm done.
So cool.
So it's pretty cool.
All right, well, that is where we are going to wrap up today's conversation. Love talking to Colin there. He's got so much knowledge and insight about autonomy and automation and this side of the ag tech. So really appreciate this. And as I've said in episodes in the past few months, absolutely think this is the direction that agriculture is headed, and the solutions are just going to get better and better and better, and hopefully more and more and more affordable. And there's a lot of cool stuff happening out there already on commercial farms. Not something that we just talk about in a future context, but in a present context, which I think is probably the most exciting part of all this. So thank you to Colin for being on the show. Go check out what they're doing at Mach.io. That's Mach.io. As always, I'll include a link for that in the show notes for today's episode. Thank you as well to Case IH for being our quarterly presenting sponsor this quarter. Also leave a link for them in the show notes. And last but never least, thank you for your time and your attention. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.